Before we get started, a quick heads up. Presidents Unplugged now has merch. If you want to support the show and represent the podcast in your daily life, you can at presidentsunpluggedmerch.com. That is presidentsunpluggedmerch.com. Now, let's get into today's episode. When people think of Ronald Reagan, they think of charisma, they think of humor, they think of a Hollywood actor. But before the great speeches, before the Cold War negotiations, before the landslide victories, before becoming president, he was just a little kid. A little kid with the nickname Dutch. And today on Presidents Unplugged, we're going to figure out how this little kid changed the course of American history. Let's do this. Ronald Wilson Reagan was born on February 6th, 1911, in Tampico, Illinois. He was given the nickname Dutch right after he was born when his dad looked at him and said he looked like a fat little Dutchman. How pleasant. His mother, Nell Reagan, was deeply religious, compassionate, and endlessly optimistic. She believed in the goodness of people. And this optimism of hers went right to her son. That would shape Ronald Reagan for the rest of his life. His dad was not the same way, though. His father, Jack Reagan, struggled with alcoholism. Reagan could not rely on him at all. There were nights when little Ronald Reagan had to go get his dad and bring him home because he was so drop-dead drunk. It's pretty sad. But that contrast between hope on one side of him and instability on the other built something inside of Reagan. Personal responsibility, resilience, a belief that people could rise above their circumstances and still do great things. Reagan was also an avid reader. As a young man, he carried with him a book called That Printer of Udell's. And this is not the Udell who sung Rolling in the Deep. This book told the story of moral courage and character, something that Reagan today is known tremendously for. Reagan often said that this book shaped his belief in individual responsibility and faith in the American story. But after schooling, Reagan did not immediately go into politics. He had all these educational ideas and, honestly, experiences behind his belt at a really young age. But he didn't immediately jump to the presidency. He went into radio. Reagan had gained this voice of a radio host, and he wanted to use it. He became a sports announcer in Iowa. Even though he wasn't a celebrity from this, yet again, this was where his voice was sharpened. This is where he learned timing, storytelling. So in 1937, he moved to Hollywood. He signed with Warner Brothers and appeared in more than 50 films. His most notable role was in a movie called Newt Rockne All-American, where he played a character named George Gipp. This role was so popular that it played a big part in Ronald Reagan's first real nickname, the Gipper. The Gipper is not only Reagan's nickname, but the name of a really awesome restaurant in the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. If you ever go to Simi Valley, check it out. But Ronald Reagan wasn't going to be an actor forever. During World War II, Reagan did not serve overseas like a lot of people did due to his poor eyesight. Instead, he worked in the Army Air Force's first motion picture unit, producing training and propaganda films. Way to use your skills, Ronald Reagan. Even during war, his weapon was still communication. After the war, Reagan became president of the Screen Actors Guild. The Screen Actors Guild is an organization that helps with little internal problems in Hollywood. Reagan was very good at it. But this is also where politics quietly entered Reagan's life. And during the Cold War, right when Reagan was entering this Screen Actors Guild position, the fear of communist influence in Hollywood was rising. After something like the Truman Doctrine, people were scared about communists. They knew what they had been doing and didn't want to do it to America. So Reagan cooperated with investigations and developed a firm anti-communist stance that he would have for the rest of his life. But it was during that period that a woman named Nancy Davis approached him. She'd been mistakenly placed on a list of possible communists. She needed help clearing her name because she knew she wasn't affiliated with communism. Reagan not only helped her, but said, don't quote me on this, I'll help you get off this list, but can I also take you out to dinner? Oh my goodness, Ronald Reagan was so smooth. So they went to dinner. And in 1952, they were married. Nancy Reagan was not just a partner to Reagan. She was his anchor, his defender, his closest advisor. She believed in him at moments when he even doubted himself. So in 1966, with this new companion of Nancy Davis, the non-communist, with him, Ronald Reagan ran for the governor of California. He won. He served from 1967 to 1975. And as governor, he dealt with protests of students in schools, budgeting battles, and rising cultural tensions as the Cold War kept going. He governed the state as a conservative, emphasizing fiscal discipline and law and order. He didn't play around. This actor was becoming an executive. And in 1976, Reagan was like, California? Why not the whole country? So in 1976, Reagan went past California and attempted to run for the Republican presidential nomination. But here was the problem. Gerald Ford, only been president for like 2 years, but people really knew who he was. I love the way the recent Ronald Reagan movie with Dennis Quaid covers the event. Reagan went, he was excited, he had passion to run for president, but Ford was known by more people. And even though it ended up being a pretty close race, he ended up losing at the convention. So Gerald Ford ended up running as the Republican nominee. But guess who showed up? A well-known peanut farmer named Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter ended up beating Gerald Ford in this election, not handedly, but by a pretty good margin, because Ford had a bunch of mistakes in the televised debates, and it was not good luck on Ford's end. So, Ronald Reagan felt defeated. But guess who was there to support him? His lovely wife, Nancy Reagan. She made sure he knew that he shouldn't let his failures define him. He should only use them to come back stronger and win. So he did just that. While Jimmy Carter was president, I love in the episode Peanuts, Politics, and Peace when I cover that Carter's an amazing person, but he had a pretty rough presidency. From a struggling economy to the energy crisis, and overall just Americans not trusting the government after something like Watergate, it didn't look too good. But the final nail in the coffin was right around the end of Carter's term. when 52 Americans were held hostage for 444 days. What? Who did this? China? Japan? No. Iran. Ooh, that rhymed. Yeah, we've been hearing a lot about Iran on the news recently, and guess what? This is one of their first deliberate attacks towards Americans. Just kidnapping our people. By 1980, the country was exhausted. We were frustrated. We were sick of all this stuff happening. We needed change. So Reagan ran again for the presidency. He won the Republican convention. He became the nominee. And during the debate against President Carter, Reagan delivered a simple question to the American people. One that he had very personal connections with, especially after losing the nomination. He asked the question, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" It's not complicated. It's personal. It forced those voters to reflect. And he also showed something else: calm confidence. When Carter attacked his character and his acts in the debate, he would just simply smile and say, "There you go again." With all these actions put together, Reagan won in a pretty good landslide in the 1980 election. Reagan became the 40th president of the United States. On the day he was inaugurated, the American hostages in Iran were released. Well, that was quick. After 444 days in captivity, they came home. The negotiations had been completed in Carter's final days, but no matter if Carter or Reagan made that final decision, what matters is they were back. Reagan stepped into office during the worst inflation Americans had experienced in more than 30 years. Inflation had climbed above 13%. Interest rates were sky high. The economy soon fell into a deep recession in 1981 and 1982. Wait, I thought Reagan had a good economy. Not for the first few years. Reagan's answer was an idea that he called Reaganomics. I'm going to try my absolute best to explain Reaganomics pretty simplistically. It's also known as trickle-down economics. The idea is that if we give tax breaks to the richest of the rich, pretty much saying, we're going to lower your rate so you don't have to pay as much to the government, those uber-rich folks will invest more, and they'll put more towards their businesses. That creates jobs and raises the wages for the people working for them, the middle class. So, from the tippity top, the money that they get to keep trickles down to the middle class. And from there, whatever the middle class has excess, that'll trickle down to the lower class. So did Reaganomics work? It really does depend who you ask. Some upper class individuals will say, yeah, I'm fine with it. Tax breaks, baby. Some middle class people felt the trickle down, some just didn't. Some lower class people felt the trickle down, and some people didn't even know it was happening. It very much depends who you ask. But the entire country realized that it was not working immediately. The first couple years were pretty painful. Unemployment rose above 10%, and people didn't really know what it was doing. But by 1983, the economy rebounded. Inflation dropped significantly, and growth of the economy surged. Millions of jobs were created throughout the mid-1980s. And looking back, I'd say that Reaganomics worked pretty well. But you know what didn't work pretty well? When Reagan was shot! God, that was a jump scare. On March 30th, 1981, outside of the Washington Hilton Hotel, Reagan was shot by John Hinckley Jr. A bullet ricocheted off the limousine and entered his chest, stopping about an inch from his heart. He was rushed to the hospital, and as he was wheeled in, he told the doctors before they put him to sleep, "I hope you're all Republicans." Even in crisis, humor. He recovered. His approval ratings soared after this assassination attempt survival. Our country rallied behind him. And later that same year came a defining moment in Reagan's presidency. Even though he was kind of just this silly, goofy guy, some people saw him as weak. What's this guy gonna do? Just make a joke about us, then just go on with his day? I'm not scared of him. Oh, they should have been. In 1981, over 11,000 federal air traffic controllers went on strike. They wanted a pay increase. They wanted retirement benefits. They didn't like their conditions, so they started to just not show up to work and complain. Well, Reagan wasn't dealing with that. They were technically prohibited from striking. So Ronald Reagan gave them 48 hours to return to work. So you can have your jobs, just go on back, just a little push. They said, nuh-uh. So Reagan just fired 11,000 people like it was pretty much nothing. Reagan was not dealing with this. He was not a softie. He was going to do what it takes to have people willing to do what they need to do. It was decisive. It signaled a shift in the workers of America and asserted executive authority. This was the President of the United States, not your aggravating neighbor who's sick of you for mowing your lawn too short. Whether praised or criticized, it was firm leadership. And America was going to have to decide if we wanted that firm leadership for 4 more years. The election of 1984. Reagan's re-election bid was much different than his first run for president because he didn't really have to prove himself. He just had to tell America that we're doing fine. And as some random Southerner once said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. This re-election campaign turned into a now famous TV ad. And it went something kind of like this. It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. Under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago? Reagan was just kind of trying to be this chill guy. We're doing fine. Why do we need any change? Let's just keep doing what we're doing. And he also faced Walter Mondale, who was Jimmy Carter's vice president, the guy that Reagan beat. Uh-oh, there's some drama in here. While George Washington himself might not have had an Instagram page, Presidents Unplugged does. If you want to see some presidential content and overall updates on the show, come to the Instagram at Presidents_Unplugged. See you there. People really didn't know how the election was going to go. Back then, it seemed almost as close as an even race. But that all stopped during a very famous televised debate moment. I have more on my episode, The Red Wave, Reagan's 1984 Domination. Domination? can't be that serious. Oh, it was. Reagan gets on the debate stage and is asked a pretty good question. I'm paraphrasing here, but Reagan, you're so old. Like, you're literally almost 73. No American politician can be over the age of 73. Yeah, wait till we tell him about modern politics. But Reagan was just asked about concerns regarding his age. If being old was going to prevent him from being able to do everything that a president normally does. But he responded with this now famous quote: "I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit, for political purposes, my opponent's youth and inexperience." Oh my goodness, Ronald Reagan! Win over America again, why don't you? If the audience just laughed at this quote, this joke, this jab, this flip around, it would have been fine. But Walter Mondale himself laughed. In later interviews, Walter Mondale admitted something pretty sad. The second he heard that joke and heard the response, he knew he had lost that election. And I'm not saying he lost that election by one state. He only won one state in the District of Columbia. Reagan won 49 states in one of the most lopsided elections in American history. 49 states? Do you think that could even happen today with America's divisive climate? I don't think so. And I'm interested to see if a 49-state electoral landslide could ever happen again. But now it was time to act. He'd won the presidency. He has 4 more years. What is he going to do? He shifted his techniques from policy and the economy to negotiation. Ronald Reagan met with Mikhail Gorbachev multiple times. And in 1986, at Reykjavik, they nearly agreed on something. The United States agreeing with the Soviet Union. Whoa, this is cool. The United States and the Soviet Union almost agreed on just cutting down their number of nuclear weapons. That's a good starting place. But the talks stalled over disagreements about that missile prevention system. I mean, everyone knows that America's military is pretty high-end. In some ways, both parties were scared of the other party's reactions. The Cold War was terrifying because people knew the scope. People knew just how many missiles were around the world. And what's scary is, what do we not know? They came to an agreement. In 1987, they signed the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, where both nations agreed to eliminate an entire class of the nuclear missiles that they possessed. It was the first treaty in history to actually remove nuclear weapons, not just limit them. In that same year, standing at the Brandenburg Gate in West Berlin, Reagan delivered one of the most memorable lines in presidential history, attempting to release the people of Berlin from the bondage they were put in. Lots of rhyming in this episode. And this is where Ronald Reagan delivered one of the most memorable lines in presidential history. "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." 2 years later, the Berlin Wall fell. The Cold War was nearing the end. The Soviets didn't know it, but they were about to be gone. Throughout his entire presidency, Reagan remained consistent in his tone, his optimism, his humor. He understood the power of communication. He understood that leadership is not just about policy, but communication. That perspective changed his entire philosophy as president. And then Reagan left office in 1989. His vice president, George H.W. Bush, succeeded him. And in 1994, Reagan announced that he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. In a handwritten letter to the American people, the man who once commanded the entire country would slowly lose his memory. But Nancy remained by his side. Their partnership endured until the very end. Ronald Reagan passed away in 2004. And after his passing especially, the American people looked back at his impact. Was Ronald Reagan a flawless president? No. His economic policies still remain debated today. His expansion on the national debt for defense is still discussed. His conservative shift reshaped American politics. But what cannot be denied about Ronald Reagan's legacy is transformation. He reshaped the Republican Party. He shifted the tone of the Cold War. He restored confidence to a country that felt uncertain. He demonstrated that humor and strength could exist together. He proved that communication mattered. Those years, the Reagan Revolution, were not just about tax rates or missile systems. They were about the belief in American optimism. The belief that a country was capable of renewal, a comeback. Years before Ronald Reagan was even the governor of California campaigning for Barry Goldwater, in his 1964 speech, A Time for Choosing, Reagan had declared, "You and I are told we must choose between a left or right. But I suggest there is no such thing as a left or right. There is only an up or down." That perspective changed his entire philosophy. And whether you agree with him or not, the impact, the drive, the optimism that Reagan left on the American story is undeniable. And that is why Ronald Wilson Reagan is so important. Tune in next Friday as we talk about Joe Biden, a man who is sadly seen as just some lackluster recent president. But I don't see it that way. Joe Biden had a legacy in American politics as a fighter and one who never gave up, no matter the circumstances. Learn about him and much more next week on Presidents Unplugged. I'm Ty Svensson, and I'll see you soon. God bless. Thank you for listening to Presidents Unplugged. If you enjoy content like this, give us a follow on Apple Podcasts or Spotify today to be notified that your favorite presidential podcast has released new content. Now, when do we release new content? Once a month, maybe twice a year, maybe even once a year? No. We release new content every Friday at 1 p.m. for my American enthusiasts to enjoy. Come join me on our dive into making American history the most entertaining and interesting subject to learn every single week. I'm Ty Svensson, this is Presidents Unplugged, and I'll see you soon.